Hello to life forms throughout the universe. Genry here. I hope you're enjoying the holiday season. Firstly, let me say thanks for tuning into my video analysis on the Silver Case. I really enjoyed the entire process of making it, from writing it out to editing the final draft. I reflect on the video in more detail throughout my Tumblr, which I'm basically using as a personal blog now. So if you like the crap I write, check out my page through the link below. I also appreciate just about all the feedback I got from the video as well. Hope you're looking forward to more in-depth dives into Suda's other projects. You know the train won't stop here. Anyway, for those that watched my video on the Silver Case, if you recall, I used parts of an interview I conducted with James Mountain, the main interpreter for Grasshopper's games. While I used a number of clips from the interview, we actually had a lot of fun talking about all kinds of things, the majority which did not make it into the video. Now, if the one thing you wanted for Christmas, or Hanukkah, or Kwanzaa, or Bodhi Day was to listen to Grasshopper Manufacture's main interpreter talk about the process of translating the Silver Case, immigrating to Japan at only 18 years old, how he was often harassed by cops, or a bunch of other stuff, this is my gift to you. One last thing, the audio is weird in parts because my original voice track for this interview was horrendous. I was experiencing computer troubles and messed up my settings to the nth degree during our talk. So, I took the liberty to re-record all of my questions and responses to the best of my ability. Trust me, I know my voice is grating enough, so if you just imagine it with these audio levels, that should help you understand that I made the right call. I also add visual context throughout our conversations. With that said, please enjoy, have a good rest of the year, and I'll catch you sometime in 2024.
This is kind of a me problem, but should I try to keep it like clean and family friendly, or should I just speak naturally, or what do you prefer?
Whatever is most natural for you. I trust your judgment, and I want you to have fun too.
I mean, I'm not going to be, dropping any like N-bombs or anything like that, but I have a tendency to swear like a lot. We're not specifically told not to, so I just want to make sure that like if I say fuck here and there, it's not going to like, cause a problem. Once I got your questions, I looked through a bunch of like my old like correspondence and some of the game files and stuff like that. But awesome. I've taken a lot of brain damage over the years, and so there's likely to be a lot of stuff that like I don't remember that at all. But if you like, I could go ahead and like look up some stuff later on. Like I just in case, I got hold of all the localization files that I could find. Any specific questions about that? If I can't answer them right now, I could probably look it up and like send the answers over later or something. We could even do like a follow-up interview, or like just do like a second one to like mash together or something like at a later date or something too. So.
Down the line, I'd love to talk to you about the 25th Ward, but that's definitely not something I can tackle right now.
I still need to play that, actually.
Yeah, the game is just so massive and heavy as it is.
When I did the localization for 25th Ward, when it actually came out, I think I had a PS3 that like barely worked. I think just a few months after 25th Ward was released, it was between I think then and maybe like 2 years ago or so, when my kid turned like 5, I got her a Switch. But in between, like for like those several years, like I didn't really have like a console to play games on or anything. I ended up missing out on like a lot of shit that I actually worked on myself, but yeah, I'll try to answer stuff to the best of my ability. I don't know how much experience you have dealing with like Japanese like developers and stuff with interviews, but a lot of times they'll be like, okay, send the questions over ahead of time so we can like vet them and make sure it's okay and stuff. Like I said, I just wanted to make sure that like I knew what I was talking about. So yeah, if you have any extra questions that pop up like off the top of your head, feel free to ask whatever you want. If there's anything that for whatever reason I can't actually answer, I'll just tell you I can't talk about that, or I straight up just don't remember. But I'm pretty much open for anything. So
alright, so can you please introduce yourself, your position at Grasshopper Manufacture, state how long you've been in the company, and what games you've worked with the team so far?
My name is James Mountain, nowadays commonly known as Grasshopper James. I am the official community manager at Grasshopper Manufacturer. My official title is community manager. I deal with sort of a wide variety of other stuff as well. Obviously like game localization, when we have something to be localized, translation and interpretation for like internal, external meetings, communication, stuff like that. Domestic as in Japanese, and overseas PR, marketing, kind of like connect the teams that are working on the Shadows of the Damned remaster and stuff between, for example, Grasshopper and NetEase and the guys at Engine Software. Pretty much anything having to do with like translation or interpreting or just words in general, that's pretty much my gig. I started working at Grasshopper officially just over a year ago. It was last June, but I've been working with Suda and Grasshopper in general for about, what year is it, 2023? I guess about 7 years now. While I was working at my previous company, basically it started with the silver case. My previous company, the CEO basically went to Suda directly and said, hey, you guys have this game called the Silver Case, and it's kind of known as like, you know, an unlocalizable game, but I've got a dude who can localize this shit. Just give us a shot and let us show you what we can do. And at first they were pretty skeptical. They're like, okay, yeah, well, you know, whatever, we've heard that before, but go ahead and try it. Yeah, he gave me a chunk of the game. I localized the shit out of it, and apparently they were impressed enough to be like, okay, you guys got the job. So pretty much from that point on, I've been, I spent a few years sort of being lent out to Grasshopper as like interpreter and attendant for when Suda would go to, like, say, for example, GDC or PAX or E3 or something, interpreting for like interviews, translation for not only the game itself, but also, you know, correspondence between Grasshopper and other people who are working on the game, concept artists, stuff like that. So yeah, I've been working with them on and off pretty closely for about 7 years now, I guess. And as far as the titles I've worked on, I did the localization for Silver Case, 25th Ward, Travis Strikes Again, and No More Heroes 3, unless I do something completely fucked up and get fired. Hopefully whatever titles come out from here on out until I die. So that's pretty much my story.
So a lot of these questions come from big Grasshopper fans. There's one asking about the website, which has world-building text talking about various cases the HCU handled before the game starts, as well as the short manga. Did you translate those pieces as well?
The manga, is that the one? This is a really specific question, and for some reason this is the first thing that pops in my mind, but is that the one where the two dudes are discussing like coffee? Or like a specific type of coffee or something? Or is that...
Oh no, that was Red, Blue, Green, which was sort of like a sequel manga to the 25th Ward, which came with the Switch port. This one I'm talking about was from 2016 when the Silver Case was remastered for PC.
Like I said, I've taken a lot of brain damage over the years, so there's a high chance that I did localize that, but just completely don't remember. But put simply, from around the point when the Silver Case started getting localized, again, I wasn't actually a member of the company at that point, so Grasshopper may have outsourced a few things to someone else, but as far as I'm aware, I'm pretty sure if it's Silver Case or 25th Ward related, there's about a 95% chance that I did the localization for it, yeah.
Okay, cool. So, regarding the Silver Case itself, were there any particular rules or supervision you had to work under translating the original Japanese text into English, whether they were rules set by Suda or somebody else?
Yeah, as for rules and I guess sort of like guidelines for the localization of the Silver Case, it's kind of hard to explain. It's kind of contradictory, but I mean, just due to the sheer volume of text and difficulty, and you know, just how complicated a lot of this stuff is. In that respect, it was really difficult and took a lot of time and was a bit stressful sometimes. But on the other hand, it was also kind of really chill as well, because when it was first decided that we were going to localize the Silver Case, at the time I worked for Playism, indie publisher, which is part of Active Gaming Media. At the time when it was decided that Playism was going to localize and publish the Silver Case, we had an initial meeting with Suda and a couple of his top guys. I was basically told, okay, we've seen the stuff you've done so far. We trust you. So basically do whatever you want. For each individual character, for each scenario, for the general vibe of the game, I guess the whole game itself, in each scenario and each character, we trust you. So go ahead and take it all in and just localize it the way that you think would feel best and the way that you think would feel most natural for this character or for this scenario, or again, just for the game as a whole. I did work in relatively close contact with Suda and his team while doing the localization. Basically, I'd localize like a chunk of the text, you know, maybe like one or two scenarios, send them over with a bunch of notes explaining, okay, in English, I had to change this thing to this just because the reference wouldn't carry over to somebody who didn't live in Japan in the 80s or 90s or something. Again, it's, you know, it's not just translation, it's localization. So I offered up explanations for why certain things were changed or tweaked a bit. And for most of the stuff, he was like, okay, yeah, sounds cool. Just let's go with that. The one thing that we did have a lot of back and forth with that took a lot of tweaking and adjustments with Suda and Grasshopper's guidance was the, sorry, I'm trying to remember the English name. In Japanese, it's Hyakumon Kumite, the 100-question quiz, I guess. There was a lot of stuff in there that I'm like, okay, I could translate this into English, but nobody's going to know what the fuck I'm talking about, you know? Like stuff about TV shows or like pro wrestlers from Japan from like the early 80s or something like that. You probably notice that there's a lot of stuff in that part that has to do with like references to like The Simpsons or like Back to the Future and just really, Western centric stuff. There actually was a lot of really Western stuff included included in the original text. And if my memory's correct, I believe the majority of it was localized pretty straightforwardly. Yeah, there was a lot of things that I was like, okay, there's no way that like a Westerner who doesn't speak Japanese, who's never lived in Japan, who isn't familiar with like, Japanese pop culture 20 years ago, there's no way they're going to get this. So I'm just going to go ahead and totally change it to something completely different and see what happens. I mean, going through like 100 questions and answers, it gets to a point where, I've been doing it for like 14 hours that day or something. I'm just getting kind of tired. And I'm like, okay, this is something I'm gonna have to completely make up. I'm just gonna like adjust this to fit my own personal preferences. So I'd include instead of like a question about like some early 80s Japanese pro wrestler or something like that, or some manga or something, I change it to a question about like a Led Zeppelin song or like, I don't know, a Nirvana song or just something that I was personally into. It included an explanation for why I changed this to this. And there was a lot of back and forth with that stuff, with Suda himself and with Grasshopper saying, okay, well, this one and this one are okay, but as far as this one and this one go, Suda would tell me, I don't really have any personal connection to this specific medium or this specific IP, or I'm not into Jefferson Airplane or whatever the hell it was that I included, So maybe tweak it so that it's instead of having just something completely unrelated, change that like early 80s like manga or that early 80s Japanese pro wrestler to like something like, I don't know, Spider-Man or like Hulk Hogan or something that something to be more familiar to Westerners. So that was probably the part of the game. In fact, I'd say that was probably the only part of the game where I really had any specific feedback and like guidelines and rules about how to go about the localization. Everything else was, again, it was really chill and hands off. They're like, okay, if this is what you think is cool, go for it. I mean, it was basically don't add anything in that isn't specifically in the game apart from like the 100 questions thing. I mean, there wasn't anything in the text to begin with that would have been problematic, but don't add any like racial slurs or like anything overtly political that again isn't already covered in the game. But besides that, I pretty much had free reign over how I wanted to localize everything.
That's actually funny you bring up the 100 questions kumite. How you describe that reminds me of the 100 endings from the 25th Ward. Bilingual fans noticed the original text had references to certain manga that have never seen an official English translation, so those were changed to Batman references. I always figured those changes were things Suda had to approve, and you just explained that was the case for those kinds of changes. And I think that's really neat. They still relate to things that he knows and likes. So, talking more about taking liberties and throwing in your own flavor, some things that stood out to me were certain mannerisms and cultural references. And like you said, not all of it can be properly translated into English. But on the flip side of that, did you add anything to the characters in the Silver Case and how they spoke to each other? I felt like Kusabi, for example, had a saltier mouth than Travis Touchdown.
Kusabi is hands down my favorite character of the entire series. And honestly, I don't know what it is. It's just when I first got the files, the text files, and was reading through them all, I'm like, this Kusabi dude, like, I really like this guy. Like, I really want to do something special with this guy, And I mean, by something special, I didn't mean I'm going to make him say fuck a whole bunch of times because that's hilarious. But I mean, I'm immature as hell, so like that was kind of part of it too. But I read through the entire thing like several times, looked at a bunch of like actual game footage and stuff. How'd I put it? I guess you could say I kind of came up with my own interpretation of not just the language, but I just said like the mannerisms and how the characters would, not just the specific words. Damn, this is hard to explain. How do I put this? Sorry, I've been in a non-English speaking country for the majority of my life, and English is kind of hard sometimes. For example, okay, this character is going to use this specific slang word a lot or something like that, but the way they express themselves and like, not just like certain phrases or something, but okay, this character is going to be a lot more like upfront and like kind of like full on with what they want to say, and this character is going to be a bit more, there's a feeling that they're kind of holding back a bit, or this character is going to be a bit more polite or like formal, this character is going to be a bit more like vulgar. I took a lot of hints and clues from the original text itself. I didn't want to just completely rearrange a character to make somebody who is like really like smart and like formal and polite. I don't want to turn him into like some vulgar caveman or something like that. but I did want to make sure that each character had as much of their own distinct personality and manner of expression and mannerisms as possible. There were certain things, for example, like you mentioned, Xabi, he's got a pretty dirty mouth. This is something that my boss at the time pointed out, but written in English is I stayed as faithful to the Japanese as possible, but as far as like the really specific tweaks and, you know, like the swearing and stuff like that, I thought, okay, if I was this guy in this situation, how would I say this? And I pretty much just wrote the shit out like that. So, you know, as you mentioned, Xabi has a bit more, I mean, even more of a filthy mouth than Travis. I've got a bit of a problem with that myself in real life. And when I was about maybe a third of the way through the game, my boss at the time was reading through the text. He's like, James, this is basically you, man. I'm like, yeah, I know, I did that on purpose. He's like, but somehow it actually fits too. I'm like, yeah, I got really lucky. You know, I just kind of feel a connection with this guy. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm nowhere as like cool and like badass as Xabi, but I figure, okay, this guy says a lot of the kind of stuff that I would probably say. And this guy, if he was speaking English, I feel this is the way he would express it, which is pretty much how I would too. So I added a lot of like the, you know, the swearing and sort of colorful language and stuff like that to Xabi in particular. As far as the other characters go, there were a couple that I wouldn't go so far as to say I took liberties with them, but I did have sort of a specific vision in mind. For example, what's his name? Jabroni or Shiroyabu. Again, you know, I read through the entire game text before I actually started localization. So I was like, okay, this guy, he's pretty fucked up. And as the game goes along, he clearly and more overtly gets more and more fucked up. So I want to write this guy in English as, you know, not the kind of guy who from the very start you can tell, wow, there's something wrong with this dude, but it sort of gradually kind of comes out. Number one would be Xabi, would be the one that I put the most thought into, like exactly how each line would be written in English and exactly how he would express everything. And number two would probably be Jabroni, as far as making really specific tweaks and adjustments to the English and purposely adding specific flavor to the text and stuff like that. But yeah, pretty much all of the main characters and like I guess you could say the semi-main or supporting characters. I really put a lot of thought into each one about, okay, so in this situation, how would they say this? Or I mean, first, how are they saying it in Japanese, obviously? And then, okay, to translate that over to English, both linguistically and culturally, you know, considering like their mood at the time and like, you know, the situation that's happening and, you know, what they're like thinking of and what they're facing and what's like, you know, what kind of conflict they're going through. How would this specific character say this in English in a way that wouldn't sound like it was just straight up translated? But, you know, I mean, that's kind of the point of localization, is making it sound like it was originally written in the language you're reading. So I kind of went off on a tangent there. I'm not sure if that provides a proper answer, but that's what's up.
Oh yeah, I feel like that's usually the goal of the translator or interpreter. There are people that could be none the wiser who don't even consider that the dialogue was originally written in Japanese. For example, the voice acting in Killer 7 and No More Heroes were only in English. There was virtually no Japanese voice acting for those games. That was what the developers wanted, even though they likely don't speak the language. They had people that were able to interpret it properly and accurately so it sounds more human, because exact translations just aren't going to sound right.
It's going to sound completely ridiculous, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So that makes a lot of sense, and I have to agree, the way Kusabi speaks is pretty believable. Even with some of the stuff you don't really hear these days anymore, it all sounds like it's coming from an old man who's just kind of sick of everybody's shit.
At the time of release, we did get a number of comments saying, hey, wait a second, like this specific word is that's not cool anymore, man, or like, you know, this isn't really how, you know, you shouldn't really say stuff like this. And I had to kind of remind people whenever possible, this is not set like now. I mean, I guess at the time it was what, 2016, 2017. This is set at like the end of the last century. And yeah, it's in Japan, but it's being localized for English and for the West. I'm not going to bring up any specifics, but I mean, there's a lot of like words and expressions that, you know, 25 years ago were pretty much totally normal and maybe even a bit controversial or considered inappropriate at the time, but that these days you just straight up don't use them. You know what I mean? I guess you could say I purposely included stuff like that to show not only A, this is a sort of a sign or sort of a mark of the time period that in which it takes place, but also for specific characters showing that this is the kind of person that doesn't give a fuck if people think that he's inappropriate, or this guy doesn't care if people are offended by the way he says things. This is just the way the guy is. It wasn't me like including my own personal biases, or like I'm gonna shit on this specific like group of people or this minority or something like that. It was okay if this guy was speaking English in this situation at this time, he'd probably say it like this, and people would probably think he was a dick even at the time, but that's the character. So again, I'm old, and I've been living in Japan for like 25 years now, so I do have to sometimes make an effort to update my syntax and remind myself that okay, it's not okay to use these specific phrases anymore that back in the day we used without giving it any thought, whatever. But to be specific, what I believe these days is referred to as the R word. I believe that came up a couple times in the text. And that was one of the things specifically that we got kind of called out on. And I was like, dude, it was like 1998, 1999. Like, people talked like that back then. And even back then, yeah, it was considered offensive to a lot of people, but it was pretty common and prevalent. And again, these are the kind of characters that wouldn't give a fuck if somebody was like, hey, man, you can't say that. This is the way the guy is. Like, I'm not trying to sugarcoat this stuff. I mean, it was written as kind of a hard-boiled crime story. So set in a very specific time period in a very specific setting, I guess. So I didn't want to get rid of those aspects just to make sure that people playing the game in 2016, 2020, 2030, whatever, wouldn't be offended. I didn't want to censor it. There are some things that I guess if you translate the text directly from Japanese to English, the English might be a little bit more offensive than the original Japanese was, but that's also kind of part of localization because it's a bit hard to explain. But in Japanese, there aren't really a whole lot of words that are considered as offensive as there are in English. I mean, there's, for example, racial slurs or like words referring to like people with like specific disabilities and stuff like that, but they're not nearly as commonly used as they are in English. I mean, regardless whether or not they're considered appropriate or not. And I did add a few things to the English translation that weren't in the original Japanese, but that was more to convey not necessarily the exact sentence that this character is speaking right now, but more the character itself. Like, this is the kind of dude this guy is, or this is the kind of thing this person would say. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. That was actually one of the examples I was thinking of, and people pointed that out during discussions, but they also understand what you were going for in that regard too.
A lot of people did seem to understand. So, okay, it's not that this localizer was a dick or whatever. Yeah, this is what he was doing, So yeah. I got kind of lucky there. I think we've got a really cool fan base, luckily, at Grasshopper. So.
Oh, that reminds me. This has been stated by Suda a couple times. The team seemed doubtful of the silver case ever getting properly interpreted into English, and Suda even showed off a DS version he said was mostly complete, but wasn't happy with how it was turning out and decided to cancel the whole thing. Have you ever seen that version?
I've never actually seen it myself. I know what you're talking about, but I've never actually seen the version myself. But I've heard also from Suda personally, and just stuff that I've read online and stuff that I've heard from other members of Grasshopper at the time, that it wasn't up to standard. I don't know what exactly was wrong with it. I don't know if it was just a completely direct translation, or if somebody just stuck a bunch of shit in Google Translate and came out all gibberish, or I don't know what it was. But yeah, from what I understand, there was an almost complete translation. I think it was like a semi-official, if not official. It was supposed to become the official translation. But there've also been like a handful of like fan translations, several attempts at localization. Basically, the same thing that my former company did. The dude would approach Grasshopper and say, "Hey, we can localize this game," and they'd give them a shot, and they'd be like, "Yeah, this just isn't it. Sorry, man." So I haven't actually seen the text myself, but that's my understanding. Is that apparently it just didn't seem to be up to standard, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, I see. So, talking more about your philosophy when interpreting games like The Silver Case, when translating the characters and how they spoke to each other, was the intent to write it closer to a Japanese drama, or did you think it was more of an American crime thriller?
I did have one or two specific Japanese TV shows and movies and stuff in mind, but in general, being a localization, not just a straight translation, I was definitely more conscious of making it feel like a more Western, kind of hard-boiled, like slightly old school, kind of gritty cop drama or something along the lines of, I don't know. I mean, I know the actual story and context don't really have anything to do with each other, but something like, for example, Dirty Harry or something like that set in like, the 70s, early 80s or something. You had a lot of these like gritty cop movies and TV shows, and everybody's constantly smoking cigarettes like in the office and saying fuck, 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 and dropping slurs left and right all casually and stuff. Again, I didn't go. I mean, there wasn't that kind of stuff in the game, so I didn't go with that. But with like the whole the slur thing, whatever. But yeah, I definitely tried to make it, I guess, as much as a Western style, sort of gritty, hardcore, like police drama type thing, as opposed to like, again, as opposed to just straight up translating it into English and making it really like Japanese style, but written in English, if that makes sense. For some specific examples, there were 2 shows in particular I had in mind while doing the localization. I mean, 2 Japanese shows. One of them is serialized drama from the 80s. In Japanese, it's called Tantei Monogatari. I'm trying to see if there's an official English title somewhere. Basically, in English, it would be like Private Detective Story or Private Dick Story or just Detective Story, I guess. In Japan, it's a really famous show. It's have you ever seen Black Rain?
Yeah.
Do you remember the main bad guy in Black Rain, the guy that Michael Douglas and Andy Garcia, like they arrest him in New York and they got to transport him back to Japan? You remember that guy?
It's been a while, but I do remember him, yeah.
I mean, I watch the movie like every month or so it's probably a bit more fresh in my memory, but he was a really famous Japanese actor named Yusaku Matsuda. He's actually, I think it was Onimusha 2, I believe. The character, visually was completely based on that guy. His sons are actually really famous actors these days as well. Yeah, it was a show featuring that guy where he was a private detective. He had this like big kind of like afro-looking hairstyle, and at the beginning of the show, in the opening sequence, there was this kind of famous thing where he'd light a cigarette and he had his lighter tweaked so that the flame would be like this high, like like we used to do back in high school, trying to look cool and stuff. Even for the time in Japan, it was really sort of an extra gritty, extra kind of like edgy private detective serialized drama. Another show which a lot of people ask if the Silver Case and 25th Ward had anything to do with this show or series, or were maybe even based on it, but it came out around the same time, I think maybe slightly before the Silver Case. But it's called Keizoku. I'm not sure if there's ever been an official English translation. I've seen English versions of it before. I think it was Keizoku : and then something like unsolved cases or something like that. It's a pretty famous Japanese drama that it started out as just like a one-time, like I think 12, 13 episode drama. And they made like a TV movie for it. Then they made like an actual like movie for it. And then a few years later, they made a sort of continuation of the IP called Spec. And a few years later, they made another continuation called Six, like SICK''S, which actually stars the son of the guy that I was just talking about from Black Rain.
Oh.
It was by a Japanese director. I can't remember his first name. His last name is Tsutsumi. He's really famous here in Japan. I'm not sure if much of his work has been localized to the West. He's not like Suda in a lot of ways. He's got a really specific vision and like a really specific touch to his work. Like most of his TV shows and movies, you can watch them for like 2 or 3 minutes and be like, okay, this is definitely that dude. You know what I mean? It was like a serialized drama. Like each week it would be like a different case, but it also had sort of like an overarching like storyline that progressed as the series went through. But it was kind of similar to the Silver Case in a lot of ways. It's like a police procedural, but it deals with kind of like, they never overtly state it, but it's clearly sort of supernatural elements and like certain people who have these like really weird and never fully explained like powers and abilities, and just really quirky characters, and a lot of like conversations and situations where you're just like, what the fuck is this? Like what the hell is going on? Like it's entertaining and it's cool, but this wasn't actually necessary for the story. Like why the fuck is this even, I like it, but why was this even included? There's a lot of stuff like that. I definitely was really conscious about that. One of the 2 main characters, his name is Mayama. He's one of my favorite characters of any medium in any country ever. So yeah, there's obviously, the drama I'm talking about, it was all in Japanese, so I couldn't really use like, the actual expressions and stuff like that in the localization. But character-wise, I thought, okay, not only, the character of Kusabi, but the character of Mayama in the show Keizoku. If I was writing this guy in English, which is a show that at the time I'd rewatched the entire series probably, and the series and movies honestly at least 20-30 times, so I was a lot more familiar with that than I was with the Silver Case, obviously. So I thought, okay, I'm really familiar with this Mayama character, and he's really similar to Kusabi in a lot of ways, so how would this guy say this in English? And there was actually a lot of cases which that really helped out, because I'm like, okay, I know what this guy's saying in Japanese, I understand what he's he's saying, and I've got a couple different ideas for how I could put it in English, but how could I put it in exactly the right way that would convey his character and his mood and stuff? So sometimes I'd go back to the Mayama character and be like, oh, okay, well, if it was this guy, he'd say it this way. Oh shit, there we go. So yeah, that was the Keizoku series in general. That was something that I was definitely really conscious about translating the game. And like I said, after it came out, coincidentally, I guess, a lot of people picked up on the fact that both the game and that drama, they came out around the same time period. They've got a really similar sort of vibe to them. They happen to share some like similar themes and stuff. Suda has said really specifically several times that the game, it wasn't actually based on the series. In fact, I believe he was finished writing the game by the time the series had actually even come out. So it's just completely coincidental, but there's a lot of overlap between the game and the series. This is just me kind of fanboying out here, but if you're able to find an English translation of the Keizoku series or movies, I highly recommend it because they're fucking awesome. To be honest, I don't have a very high tolerance for a lot of Japanese TV shows and dramas and stuff, but I literally rewatch Keizoku in the movies like at least once every couple months over the past 24, 25 years or so. So
I'll definitely try to look for them. Funny enough, I feel like that's happened to Suda, where someone compared an older film to Killer 7, but Suda has stated he went media blackout when making that game, so it's likely just another coincidence. But anyway, regarding the Silver Case, it's mainly focused on the police force in Japan, and how the police function in Japan in real life is much different than in America. Was there anything about the characters or their jobs that are exclusive to how the law handles crime, and did that cause any issues interpreting the dialogue or the story?
Actually, that's one thing that before I went through like all the files and really got into localization, that's actually one thing I was sort of worried about. I left the States pretty much just after I turned 18, and I've been living here almost exclusively ever since. I've never really had to deal with the police in the States for anything. I mean, it's not like I'm getting arrested right and left over here or anything, but having lived here for the majority of my life, I have a much better idea of like how the system works here. As far as the States goes, like I used to watch Cops when I was a kid. And like I had a couple friends whose dads were cops or something like that. And also, obviously just stuff you learn in school, you see on TV and movies and shit like that. I was kind of worried, thinking, okay, I'm more familiar with the way the system is here in Japan. Am I going to be able to like properly localize this stuff in English without writing something that seems it makes sense to me, but it seems nonsensical to like Western players, whatever. But luckily, going through the game, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff that was based on the way actual police would, or at least should be working in real life. I can only really speak for the US, but so when I say Western, I guess in this case I mean the States. But one of the biggest differences between the way the Japanese police work and the American police work is, I know that these days this sounds kind of, I guess, not contradictory, what would the word be? It sounds kind of bullshit, I guess, but in not necessarily my own personal experience, but again, I've been here a long time. I've met and hung out with like a lot of people. I've heard a lot of stories and stuff. From what I understand, the Japanese police, to a lot of people, surprisingly, actually have much more of a tendency towards violence than American police do. Not as in, they'll start blasting away like at any given opportunity, but for example, during like questioning and interrogation and just immediately after arrest and stuff, you've got a much higher probability of getting your ass kicked in Japan than you would in the US. Again, I know things have sort of shifted a lot over the years, but at least at the time, there's that, plus the fact that I believe in the States, if you're arrested, they can hold you for, I think it's like 24 hours or something like that, until they actually have to file like a proper charge. And so, okay, this is the crime you've been arrested for. This is what we're charging you with. This is how it's going to work. In Japan, I think it's about 22 days or something. You've got close to a month where the police can pretty much arrest you and stick your ass in jail and not tell you shit. Like, they don't have to give you access to a lawyer. They don't have to give you a phone call. They don't even have to tell you why you're arrested. All you know is you're in jail now. You'll be told at some point what's going on, I mean, obviously in any country, there's a lot of insecurity and fear and, worry and stuff when dealing with the police. Because, I mean, the fact that you've been arrested for something is never a good sign in any country, I guess. In Japan, there's more of this, how do I put this? I'm not sure how relevant this is to the question, to be honest, but there's a lot more of a sense of, like, I guess, not necessarily dread, but just you have no idea what's going on. Like, again, I've been here a long time. I've hung out with and met like lots of people and heard lots of stories and stuff. There's a lot of times when somebody will be arrested for for something, and again they're stuck in jail for like almost a month, and finally one day they're told, oh, okay, yeah, we're not pressing charges after all, you can go. It's like, well, what the fuck have I been doing here for the past like 3 weeks? I lost my job and like haven't been able to talk to my family and stuff over something that turned out to be nothing. Or they can be like, okay, well, we arrested you, for example, you had weed on you or something. We've also decided to like add these and these and these and these charges as well. So we're going to keep you in here for another month or two, and then we'll discuss, court dates and stuff like that. So there's a lot more uncertainty and I guess nervousness when dealing with the police here in Japan. Another thing too is in the US at least, I feel like people have a lot more general experience dealing with the police, not necessarily getting like arrested or something like that, but for example, getting pulled over for speeding, or, getting a parking ticket, getting bitched out for like jaywalking, or like, littering on the street or something like that. People have a lot more just day-to-day experience with dealing directly with police than they do here in Japan. For example, as, like a big dodgy looking white dude, I tend to stand out here in Japan. For some reason, not so much recently, but back in the day, I used to get stopped by the police like all the time, just for like riding my bike around the neighborhood or like walking down the street or something like that. The majority of the time it would be when I'm riding my bike and they're like, oh, hey, well, excuse me, sir, we need to like check the registration on your bike and check your ID. I'm like, man, it's my fucking bike. I bought it. Here's my ID. Here's the registration number. And I stand there for like 15 minutes while I call it in and check it and say, oh, okay, it all checks out. You can go ahead, sir, And like 3 days later, I get stopped by the same fucking guy. I'm like, dude, it's the same guy. You know it's me. You stopped me 3 days ago. I'm wearing the same fucking clothes, Oh, but we just got to be sure, sir, Obviously, that doesn't happen to Japanese people all the time, but it happens to foreigners relatively often, But for your average Japanese person, they don't have a whole lot of interaction with police unless it's something like, for example, say, you find like a wallet or something on the street and you go to turn it into the police box or something, or you need to, you happen to see a cop on the street, you need to ask him for directions or something like that. Driving, for one thing, is not nearly as prevalent and common here as it is in the States. And simply because of that, you have a lot less people who are used to dealing with the police for, again, stuff like getting stopped for speeding or like parking tickets or something like that. Yeah, again, in Japan, when you're suddenly in this situation when you're dealing with the police, I think there's a lot more like nervousness and uncertainty and kind of fear and like not really knowing, how shit's going to go, as there is in the States, where again, it's relatively common to have some sort of interaction with police, whether it's like for something good or bad or neutral, whatever. Again, sorry, I kind of go off on a tangent. I'm not sure if this really answers the question at all, but one thing that I did try to include in the localization was when the police, when the police characters or the police adjacent characters, I guess, were speaking not with each other but with citizens or other people, I did try to keep that in mind and think, okay, a Japanese person would react like this, and this is how they're actually reacting in the text. But if this was a Westerner, maybe they'd be a little bit more familiar with the situation. They might be a little bit more casual. They wouldn't be as nervous. Some really, really subtle tweaks that I made the text related to stuff like that, which hopefully after this 45-minute answer makes sense.
That definitely makes sense in its own way too, and playing through it again recently, just about everything still feels really natural, and even some dialogue I thought were grammatical errors ended up being real terms people use. And I guess the police harassing you makes sense, since you're the one sticking out in Japan. Just like police here, they tend to think it's the minority that's up to something.
I'm not sure if this is something that is appropriate to like discuss or something you want to even include in the final product or whatever, but my brother-in-law, he lives in the Bay Area where I'm originally from. He's a black dude. And I've talked with him a lot about the kind of similarities between being a black dude in the US and being not just a white dude in Japan, but an admittedly relatively dodgy looking white dude in Japan, Especially back in the day, I was even more dodgy looking. I got a big dragon tattoo on my chest. I'd have my shirt open, wearing like big fucking rings, and had like blue spiked up ass hair and like shiny shirts. And again, this is like late 90s, early 2000s, so I had like the 100-inch fucking like Jenkos and stuff like that. I definitely stood the fuck out, even like in some place like Shibuya or Shinjuku, like in Tokyo. There are some kind of interesting similarities and also stark differences between the two situations. Like in the States, especially back in the day, before like the civil rights movement and everything. Minorities in general, especially black people, they had some real shit they had to worry about as far as not just police but even just general citizens go. Racism and discrimination, and I mean a lot of fucked up stuff happened, right? A lot of times for absolutely no reason whatsoever. It's just, okay, this guy looks like this, I'm gonna fuck with this guy, you know what I mean? That sort of thing. The past, I guess I've been in Japan maybe 25 years now. It's definitely gotten better over the years, but it definitely still exists. One of the main differences though is here, being a foreigner here in Japan, that really stands out. I tend to get inconvenienced. Again, not so much these days, mostly back in the day, but I would get inconvenienced a lot. Whereas, being like a black person back in the States, especially again back in like, let's say like the 50s or 60s or something, you wouldn't necessarily get inconvenienced. I mean, you might get straight up like lynched or killed, or like, have like a fucking lowercase t lit up on your front lawn or something like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Whereas here, it's a lot more subtle, but more common, I guess. Like, again, just talking with my brother-in-law, we'd exchange stories about like experiences we had with like the police and stuff. And the stuff that he's had to deal with is fewer and far between. This guy's not at all a criminal. He's a total stand-up dude. I'm not saying this guy's, he's out there, getting arrested all the time or anything like that, but just for driving down the fucking street, or like walking down the street, or hanging out in front of like a shop waiting for his buddy or something. The negative experiences he's had with police are fewer and farther between, but the stakes are a lot higher. Whereas with me, it was a lot more often and common, but again, at most it was just a fucking inconvenience. Like, dude, I'm sitting here for like 45 minutes answering these bullshit questions while you check my alien registration card, and you're calling to make sure that I am who I say I am and stuff, and I'm on my way to a job interview or something, or like I'm trying to get to work or something like that. So it's not like I have to worry about getting shot in the street or anything, but it was a major inconvenience a lot of times, so there are some parallels towards like the foreigner experience in Japan in like the late 90s, early 2000s to, I guess, general minorities in the States, especially back in the day. But again, the stakes were definitely a lot higher in the States than they were here. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, I'm sorry if this is like not at all like appropriate for this interview, whatever.
No, don't be sorry. It's really interesting to hear about. But getting back into the Silver Case, there were two sides of the story, Transmitter and Placebo. They were written by Goichi Suda and Masahi Uka, respectively. When it came to the scripts, were there any real challenges regarding the feeling and vibe between these two sides? Because they're both very different from each other. Did Suda or Uka give you any input regarding the Placebo chapters?
Actually, no, I've never spoken with or met the dude to this day. But actually, yeah, at first it was a bit jarring. I was kind of confused because at first I wasn't aware that they were written by different people. I thought, okay, this is written by the Suda 51 guy, and I get to like a certain chapter, a certain scenario, I'm like, what the fuck? I mean, it's clearly the same game, but it's written like completely differently. Like, I wasn't sure if this is like, at the time I was kind of thinking maybe this is Suda like purposely trying to like drastically change the tone of the game for this specific part or something, and I wasn't really sure what to do with it. I'm like, so do I, localizing like the exact same tone and using the same sort of expressions and the same mannerisms and stuff as I have been, or like, am I supposed to make this feel different? Like, maybe he wrote like these other parts like say like in January, and then these new parts that feel much different, maybe he wrote those in like September or something, and by that time his style had kind of changed, or he'd kind of like he decided to go in a different direction or whatever. Then I found out, oh, okay, these are written by completely separate people. Okay, that makes sense then. So once I found that out, it actually kind of became easier to adjust my localization to the specific flow and vibe of each writer's work. Again, at first it was a bit confusing and jarring with the sudden shift, but once I found out what exactly was going on, not to sound like I'm talking down on the game or anything, but at that point it was just another localization. You know what I mean? It's okay, so this is written by this guy, this is what he's going for. This is written by this guy, this is what he's going for. Okay, I'm gonna adjust, the make the subtle adjustments and tweaks based on that. To be honest, I can't remember exactly what they were, but I did get a few pointers at the time from Suda and some of the Grasshopper staff about the parts that were written by Mr. Oka. Yeah, I kept that in mind while I was doing the localization. But yeah, once I figured out what was going on, it didn't really pose much of a problem or anything. Yeah, I mean, I think at the time I was probably localizing at least 2 2 or 3 other titles like simultaneously. Again, my last company, we weren't a developer, we were a publisher and localization company. So at any given time, I'd be working on anywhere from like 1 to like 5 or 6 different completely unrelated titles. I just kind of thought of it as not a completely separate title, but I think, okay, the stuff that I've been doing so far that was completely written by Suda and the stuff that was written by Mr. Olka, I'll consider them more of like 2 like games in the same series, or 2 like, I guess, sort of parallel titles in the same universe, if that makes sense, you know, as opposed to like 2 completely different games, or conversely, as opposed to just doing the whole thing exactly the same way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, it's totally fine if you don't have an answer to this, but I saw a third writer was credited. It was Sako Kato. I was having trouble finding what he specifically contributed, but do you happen to know what role he had in the game?
Actually, yeah, I spoke with Suda about that the other day, because until you brought it up, I actually, either I wasn't aware or I'd forgotten myself. Yeah, I guess it wasn't specifically pointed out like in the credits, or there may have been some interview done back in the day where Suda spoke about it that I wasn't involved in, but put simply, the parts written by Suda were written by Suda. And the parts written by Mr. Oka and Mr. Kato, those were basically a collaboration between the 2. So there's the Suda parts and the Oka and Kato parts, to put it really simply.
That's great. I'm glad you asked. I've been so curious, as well as many others. Anyway, we got a few more here. The remaster later received 2 extra cases to link the game with Flower, Sun, and Rain and the 25th Award. Did localizing these later editions present any difficulty relating it to those later games?
This might make me sound, hopefully not, but maybe even Grasshopper or my old company sound kind of like incompetent or something. But to be honest, at the time, I wasn't aware that they were specifically supposed to be like linking like 25th Ward and like Flower, Sun, and Rain. I was under the impression that these were basically just extensions of the Silver Case, and you know, the Silver Case 25th Ward in general. It wasn't until after it was already finished that I was told, okay, this is going to be like linking this to Flower, Sun, Rain, and this is going to be kind of like leading into the 25th Ward. Yeah, I wasn't even aware of that at all at the time. I just figured, okay, well, it's from the Silver Case. I'm just going to keep going the way I have been, you know? Yeah, and actually, now that I think about it, I'm kind of glad that I wasn't aware of that, because I probably would have gotten all like neurotic about it and thinking, oh shit, I gotta go check, I gotta go, you know, like play all the way through like Flower, Sun, and Rain and make sure I don't fuck anything up and everything. But I mean, looking at it now, it would have been pretty pointless, because while they're definitely connected, they're very different games. And I feel like if I would have actually gone through and played Flower, Sun, and Rain, I feel like it would have, I mean, you know, it could have been a positive effect, it could have been a negative effect, I don't know. But in hindsight, I'm glad that I had no idea that that was the case and just kind of did it as a continuation of the Silver Case, because I think that sort of inadvertently helped me to make it flow a bit more smoothly. You know, there wasn't some kind of like jarring shift where all of a sudden like these characters are completely different. It might have had positive effects as well, but I feel like it might have been a bit jarring or a bit confusing for players if I would have been conscious about that and consciously made changes and adjustments based on that. So I'm glad that it was actually like several years later that I found that out, to be honest.
Well, I take it you've played through Flower, Sun, and Rain, if not most of it.
I haven't played through the whole thing actually, but I have played through a big chunk of it, yeah. Shit, how do I put this? I'm going to be playing through it a lot more in the coming months and years and stuff. So yeah.
Cool.
That's all I have to say about that.
Absolutely.
Oh, this is off the top of my head. Regarding the 25th Ward, the original mobile phone version is considered lost media. I'm just wondering, does anyone at Grasshopper have a way to play the original version, whether through an old phone they're hanging onto or otherwise?
Coincidentally, I think this came up a few months ago. I think we were discussing like the Shadows of the Damned remake, talking about like older Grasshopper games and, you know, how accessible like the originals were and stuff like that. It might have been Suda himself or one of the guys who's kind of in charge of administering like the data and stuff that we have like stored at the company. I'm pretty sure somebody mentioned specifically that not only do we not have any of the phones that you can play the game on, but I'm pretty sure that even if we did, due to like, you know, network compatibility, and I'm pretty sure it wouldn't even actually be playable now. So there might be some sort of like ROM or something, or some sort of something to be emulated, I guess, somewhere. But To my knowledge, yeah, I'm pretty sure we don't have an actual playable copy of the original game on the original hardware. You know what I mean?
I've seen people on the hunt for those original versions, even putting a hit out for it online. What I really want is the music, originally composed by Masafumi Takada. A few of his tracks are out there, but there's supposed to be a lot more, and if there was any sort of way you guys were to release the complete soundtrack to the mobile version, I know a lot of fans would go crazy for that.
I could ask about that actually. Like I said, I'm pretty sure there's no original hardware to play it on, but as far as the data itself goes, I mean, they had the text files to be localized and stuff. So there is a chance that they may have like the sound files and stuff as well somewhere. Again, even with like Shadows of the Damned, with the remaster for that, there's been a couple issues where we're like, oh shit, for some reason like we can't find this one specific track, or we can't find this one specific movie for the game or something. And so, you know, we've got people contacting Grasshopper staff that hasn't worked at the company for like 10 or so years now, and contacting like, you know, people we worked with before and stuff, trying to track these specific pieces of data down. So there actually is a chance that the sound files may be available. I have no idea what's up with stuff like, you know, rights and stuff like that, but I'm actually kind of personally curious too now that you bring it up. So I'm gonna try and talk to the team about that and see if I can get an answer.
Yeah, if you put the word out, that would be awesome. We've got a lot of the original artwork now, but the music is the great white whale. Anyway, people say great translators are also great writers themselves. Have you ever written or published anything original yourself? And do you have any preferred genre when it comes to storytelling?
As far as stuff like fiction goes, I've never had anything like published. I've had a couple articles that I've written for various like both online and print magazines over the years, mainly like having to do with like video games, localization in general, stuff like that. Nothing major, honestly, probably nothing that anybody would have read. Are you familiar with Automaton?
No, I haven't heard of them.
Oh, okay. It's basically it's a game media based sort of news and just article based website, I guess, that was originally started up at my previous company at Active Gaming Media. I was the original editor-in-chief of the site. It's in both Japanese and English. And for the first, I'd say maybe 8 months to a year or so, there was basically the English version and the Japanese version. And technically I was in charge of both of them, but we had like a separate team doing all the Japanese stuff, and it was pretty much hands off with that. Like every once in a while I might say, oh, hey, you know, maybe add this to this article, or like, hey, maybe take this screenshot out or something like that. But I was mainly in charge of like the English stuff. So it was me and a team of writers that we had. The site itself still exists. It's actually gotten pretty big. I think especially here in Japan, it's actually gotten pretty big. And but a few years ago, they decided to completely rehaul it. And unfortunately, all the articles that were posted for the first, I think maybe a year or two, something like that, basically got nuked. So if you go on like the Wayback Machine, you can find a handful of articles that I wrote just on, you know, gaming news. I didn't really do reviews for games. It was more like we had reviews and stuff, but I personally did more like editorial type stuff, like opinion stuff, why I think this IP sucks, or like why I think this current trend in the gaming industry sucks or is awesome, whatever. Or a lot of times it was basically this kind of stream of consciousness bullshit that I had to go back later and like edit through to make it more coherent and stuff. I had a lot of articles published on there, but again, most of them have been kind of lost to the ether. No hard feelings or anything at all, but the current site they're running is a lot different from the way it was originally. So and again, none of my stuff is left up on there anymore. Again, that was mostly like commentary and like editorial type stuff. And also, again, the stuff that I did for other like magazines and websites and stuff before was it was pretty much all, again, commentary, editorial type stuff, commenting on stuff like, you know, the state of localization in video games, or how like localization has evolved over the years, or, you know, this is my perspective as like a foreigner living in Japan, watching like Japanese media, playing Japanese games, stuff like that. But again, nothing major or nothing that anyone probably would have ever read or heard of before. As far as preferred genres, as far as writing goes, if I was to completely write something from scratch on my own, I guess the closest thing I could think of would be, and I know this is going to sound pretentious as shit, but probably kind of like Hunter S. Thompson style, like gonzo journalism type stuff. You know, there's actually a couple things that I did for Automaton back in the day that ended up getting scrapped by the higher ups because it was a bit too full on, I guess, but I do something. I go to like the Tokyo Game Show or like GDC or like some game event, whatever, and basically just instead of being like, oh, this company showed off this game and these are the features they showed and this guy made a speech, it was basically like, okay, I'm gonna come here with like no knowledge of what's going on. And, you know, depending on the situation, maybe I'm going to get shit-faced or something. And I'm just going to start talking to people and asking whatever pops into my head and just see where the conversation goes. And sometimes things will get kind of like confrontation-ish and stuff, and things will get a bit like aggressive once in a while. But mostly it was just a lot of like random stream of consciousness. Like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? Where did this shit come from type stuff, you know? When I was doing stuff for the news site, I like to really just kind of throw myself in the middle of whatever situation I was talking about and just kind of see what happened. Again, not to sound like a pretentious asshole, but if I had to pick a really specific genre for what I would like to write, I'd say probably the sort of Hunter S. Thompson style gonzo journalism. I'm just going to start writing shit and just do some weird shit and hope that I don't hurt myself too badly and see what happens and hope that people get entertained. You know what I mean?
Well, you've got the aviators, so that's one step closer to Hunter S. Thompson. And it's funny, the way you described how you had all of these ideas for articles and such that were a little too out there to reach approval, that reminds me of Tim Rogers. I believe you met him during an interview. He used to work for Grasshopper, and I'm starting to think the company just attracts people like you guys. And that's the kind of stuff he did. He used to work for Kotaku and would make asinine but hilarious videos for them, even for coverage during events like E3. So the way you described all that reminded me of him a lot.
It was a couple of years ago. I think it was either E3 or PAX, I believe. I can't remember what we were there promoting, but I went with Suda. We had an interview with Tim Rogers, and it was the first time. I think the only time I've actually met the guy face to face. But I remember at first, to be honest, thinking, the fuck is this dude's deal? And then gradually thinking, I kind of dig this dude. Yeah, I feel this guy. Yeah, you know? And yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah. But, yeah, then I found out later on that he used to work for Grasshopper too. I was like, okay, that actually kind of makes even more sense then. And that kind of made even more sense when they hired me too. You know, okay, I guess not only does Grasshopper tend to attract, you know, fucking weirdos, but I guess Grasshopper is also attracted to fucking weirdos as well. So it was kind of a perfect fit. Yeah, compliance-wise, I'm not sure if I'm even allowed to talk about this, but fuck it. One of the things I specifically remember that I actually worked pretty hard on and was really pissed off when it got cut for the old site was, and actually I found out that really soon after the original article, interview, and the whole project was supposed to go up, I can't remember what medium, what site it was, but somebody else actually did something similar. One of the ideas that I had and just took it upon myself to go ahead and do without getting permission, and then later on got told there's no fucking way we can do this, a thing that it was going to be called Yakuza on Yakuza, which basically I grabbed one of the Japanese writers from the site, and he and I got together with two former just full-on Yakuza basically. We interviewed them about, you know, their background and everything, and then actually sat there with them and played the original Yakuza game. But yeah, actually sat there with them playing it, discussed like the similarities and differences to like real life. Actually, this kind of connects to part of the reason why I got tagged to do the Silver Case localization in the first place. But you're probably aware, you know, the Yakuza games, they take place in like a semi-fictionalized version of like Tokyo, especially the first one in particular. It's basically just a renamed version of Kabukicho in Shinjuku, which nowadays it's kind of like Times Square in New York. Like it's been really cleaned up and it's much more of like a touristy area and stuff. But back in the day, it wasn't like that. Like back in the day when I first came out here, Kabukicho was where you went if, you know, you wanted to get like prostitutes or like you wanted to buy dope or you were just looking to start some shit. Basically, it was a pretty seedy place full of very naughty people. Again, I came out here when I was 18 and I grew up watching shit like Black Rain and thought that whole thing was just cool as fuck. So I used to spend a lot of time there just walking around and hanging out and meeting people and watching like the Japanese equivalent of like crackheads like beating the shit out of each other and watching dudes in like, you know, shiny purple suits with like pompadours and stuff like beating somebody with a chain to like get their money back and shit like that. So it was me as somebody who was sort of like a direct observer back at the time when Kabukicho really was kind of this fucked up, like almost kind of like lawless place, discussing stuff with the people who were actually involved doing all the fucked up stuff back at the time. And it was super interesting. We got a lot of really cool comments and like anecdotes and stuff out of it. So we originally did it all in Japanese, had it all transcribed. And as I was doing the English translation, the higher ups got wind of it, and they were like, there's no fucking way we can allow you to publish this. I'm like, why? They're like, well, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in Japan there's some really specific laws that got put in place, I think in the late 90s. I can't remember the exact English name, but it's something like the anti-organized crime initiative or something like that. It says that even if you're not a member of like a criminal organization itself or yourself, if you do any sort of business with a criminal organization, then you can be held liable for basically you're a criminal. Even if you're not like buying drugs from them or like supplying them with like, you know, prostitutes or something like that, the fact that you're doing business with them means that you're contributing to their business and you're contributing to their profits, and therefore you're directly or indirectly contributing to crime. Even though we didn't pay these guys for this interview or anything, we got told that, okay, this is going to look too much like we're supporting this kind of thing. And just the fact that you even got a hold of these guys and like met up with them and talked to them and, you know, had them like in your house playing video games and shit in the first place. We actually did the interview in my apartment at the time. They're like, yeah, this is way too close to crossing the line. So I knew you guys put a lot of work into this, but sorry, fuck no. And I lost my shit. I was like, do you have any idea how much work we actually put into this shit? Like convincing these guys to talk to us, especially me being some random white dude out here, you know, having these guys sit down and play this fucking video game and constantly ensuring them that we're not going to say their actual names. We're not going to show their faces. We're not going to give any like, you know, identifiable details or anything. Yeah, again, sorry, this went on to this turned into this big long fucking thing, but that was the thing that most sticks out in my mind as far as stuff that got shot down when I was previously a writer.
I feel like if the setting was in America, that would have flown. There's even popular channels where professional thieves and such make videos commenting on games like GTA and how they portray heists or operations in their missions. But also, has anything changed regarding the idea of the Yakuza? Because it seems to be much more popular, especially with things like the Yakuza game series skyrocketing in recognition the past few years.
Part of the thing with the whole, not necessarily just with the Yakuza series blowing up, but Yakuza has always been like a really common theme in Japanese media, from video games to TV shows and movies. Yeah. I mean, some of the biggest like movies and TV show series in Japanese history are like completely like Yakuza based and stuff, you know? So it's never been like a taboo subject or anything, but I feel in recent years, especially over the past like 15, 20 years or so, and this is just my own personal theory, but I feel like maybe one of the reasons that stuff like that has become more widespread and more accepted is like, not that the Yakuza themselves are accepted, but that's more of an acceptable theme for like video games and stuff, is the fact that they're not nearly as powerful and as influential as they were like, you know, 25, 30 years ago. Like back in the day, they used to literally walk around with like, you know how like lawyers have the, actually, I'm not sure if this is an American thing as well, but at least in Japan, like lawyers, like members of like the parliament, like the diet. Yeah, they have a little badge. Back in the day, like Yakuza would walk around with the badge of their particular family, and they had like business cards and shit, you know? And then sometime in the late 90s, when they enacted all these, basically they enacted a law that made the existence of these organizations illegal. And so, you know, you couldn't, I mean, people still did for a while, but you couldn't legally walk around, you know, with your little badge, you know, publicly displaying the fact that you're a member of this organization. There was, again, this is kind of going off on a tangent, but back in the late 90s, there was this this thing called, I guess in English it would be the Yamaichi War. And it was pretty much the last big Yakuza war that has happened since. I mean, there's been some things going on the past few years with the Yamaguchi family splitting up, and there's been some skirmishes here and there, whatever, but this is when shit was happening. Like, for example, the mayor of Hiroshima was like assassinated like in broad daylight and shit like that, you know? People were actually like shooting each other down in the streets and stuff like that. Times have changed a lot since then, and you know, a whole lot of new laws have been implemented. And basically they took a real hit to their profitability and to their influence. To put it bluntly, a lot of people just aren't as scared of them anymore as they used to be, and they're not as much of a common and prevalent presence in society as they were back in the day. There's a lot of them these days that technically they're still criminal organizations, but 90% of the shit they do is completely above board. Like, you know, for example, running like liquor stores or like convenience stores or something, simply because these different laws and initiatives have screwed them over so badly that they can't make money doing crime anymore. So they're technically still the same organization that 20, 30 years ago was like shooting people in the face and shit. But nowadays, 95% of the shit they do is like selling insurance or like buying and selling used car parts or something like that, you know? So I think the fact that they're not as scary and they're not as much of a threat to the general public anymore, I think that's probably had a lot to do with things like the Yakuza series becoming a lot more widely accepted and not being seen as controversial anymore these days, you know?
Yeah, I feel like a similar thing happened with the Mafia in the East Coast over here. Now they're virtually nowhere, so that makes sense. But speaking more on back then, what convinced you to move to Japan in order to find a job and start your life? Moving out of the country as young as 18 is just wild to me.
To be honest, I sometimes have to struggle to remember, just because I just kind of like fucking with people. And I get asked that a lot, and especially, you know, it's pretty rare finding like an American who's been here not only for like so long, but since they were so young. And so I get asked a lot of time, like, well, what brought you over here in the first place? And about 80% of the time, I'll either just make something up off the top of my head or just go with some other bullshit story that I made up before and that seemed to go over well or whatever, you know? But there wasn't really one specific like catalyst or something that set it off. It was kind of a combination of things. Part of it was where and when I'm originally from. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area I was born in 1980. So when I was a little kid going to elementary school and stuff in the Bay Area, that was right around the time when the Japanese bubble was just fucking ridiculous, you know what I mean? At the time, there was a shitload of Japanese companies that were suddenly making just ridiculous amounts of money. And like, okay, well, we want to expand. Maybe we should expand overseas now. Okay, if we're going to expand overseas, where do we want to go? America. Okay, if we're going to go to America, where do we want to go? Well, San Francisco's got a large Japanese community. There's like Japanese like convenience stores and grocery stores and stuff like that, Japanese movie theaters, shit like that, you know? So if we're going to send a bunch of our employees to somewhere in the States where, you know, these people, they don't speak English, they're not used to like American culture and stuff, we want to send them someplace that's, you know, relatively easily accessible, like physically, and also someplace relatively easy to live. So, okay, let's send them to San Francisco. So from the time around the time I was in kindergarten or so, there was just kind of like a huge influx of Japanese people moving into the States. So like when I was in elementary school, a large chunk of the kids in my class, for example, were not just like Japanese, not Japanese American or, you know, like second, third, fourth generation Japanese, but literally Japanese as in they moved to America like 2 months ago, whatever, you know? I grew up surrounded by a lot of Japanese people. Coincidentally, like a lot of my best friends happen to be either Japanese like from Japan or just Japanese by blood. Again, simply because of the area I lived in. So I grew up surrounded by a lot of like Japanese culture. Like I go to my friend's house when we were kids and we watched like Ultraman together. And, you know, I had no idea what the fuck they were saying, but it's Ultraman, you know? I'm a little kid watching these big ass monsters get their ass kicked by this badass robot guy, you know? And, you know, when I got into maybe junior high or high school, I started paying more attention to like J-pop and Japanese music and Japanese like movies and TV shows and stuff. There was a channel, actually, it was channel 26, I remember, that it was basically the general like Asian channel. Like depending on the day of the week and the time, they'd have like Vietnamese or Chinese or Tagalog or Korean or Japanese TV shows and news and, you know, music shows, variety shows, stuff like that. And every Saturday and Sunday night, they'd have this like 4 or 5 hour block of like Japanese like NHK news and Japanese like serialized dramas, variety shows, music shows, cooking shows, like the old school like samurai dramas and stuff like that. And about half of them were subtitled. And again, a lot of my friends, and especially their parents, were watching this stuff. And so I got kind of exposed to that. And I started watching a lot of the stuff myself, especially the variety shows, because I'm sure you've probably seen clips of stuff from back in the day, but like Japanese variety shows back in the 80s and 90s were fucking bonkers, man. Like they were doing some just dangerous, weird shit to people, you know? And I thought it was hilarious and amazing, you know what I mean? So I got really into that kind of stuff. Then I realized that some of the dramas were actually really cool, and I got into like a lot of the comedy and a few specific Japanese bands and stuff. I got more and more familiar with the culture and the language. And yeah, right around the time I left school, you know, fast forward to 1998, I'm like, okay, it's time to figure out what the fuck am I going to do with my life. At that time, I was living in a not very nice area with a lot of, bad shit going on, seeing a lot of my friends and like, kids I went to school with and stuff, just getting more and more fucked up and just kind of, not necessarily getting fucked up, but just kind of going nowhere. I thought, okay, I don't want to end up like this. I don't want to just live out the rest of my life kind of going nowhere, or even worse, just end up becoming a complete fuck up, or, getting arrested, or, put in prison, getting killed or something like that, turn into like a crackhead or whatever. So I want to go out and do something, but I don't know what I want to do. I don't know where I want to go. I don't have the money to go to college. I just want to get the fuck out of here. And so I thought, okay, well, I can, not as much as I can now, obviously, but I can kind of speak Japanese. I can hold a conversation, basically, I had a lot of friends here in Japan that, a lot of the kids that I knew from back in the day who had moved back, or people that I'd met like when I was in high school who'd come over for like a month or, several months for like homestay programs. I'd meet them through that, and we'd start hanging out here and become friends. They'd go back to Japan. We'd, keep corresponding and stuff. So, okay, I got friends in Japan. I can kind of speak the language. I'm familiar with like, a lot of the culture and stuff like that. To be honest, I can't stand most of the food, but what are you going to do? I'm the one foreigner out here who doesn't like fucking sushi and stuff, but it seems like a cool, interesting place. I mean, it was Japan in the 90s. It was fucking crazy, So, put simply, I bought a plane ticket. I applied for my passport, got it in the mail, and next day I got on a plane, and my dad drove me to the airport, and he's like, yeah, not a lot I can do to help you. No idea when you're coming back, what you're going to do, whatever, but here's $100. I was like, thanks. And so basically I got off the plane at 18 years old in Tokyo with $100 in my pocket and no fucking idea where I was going to live or what I was going to do or how long I was going to be able to be here or anything. So yeah, I get to the airport, I got $100. I change it in the yen. I buy like a pack of smokes and a lighter and maybe like, a lunch and like a beer or something like that. Because I realized pretty much right away that in Japan, the drinking and smoking age is 20, but nobody ever cards you ever, especially if you're a foreigner. So that was fun. But I got an extra 3 years of drinking that I would have in the States. Then I get on the bus to go into actual Tokyo proper. And by the time I get into Tokyo, I got like $60 in my pocket. And I'm like, okay, time to start my life, I guess. Fast forward to 2023, and now I'm working for Grasshopper Manufacture as community manager. There's a bunch of shit that happened in between there. Most of it's boring and inconsequential and just regular day-to-day bullshit. I don't like referring to myself as an expat. Like a lot of Westerners in Japan refer to themselves as expats. I'm a fucking immigrant, man. Like if you were talking about like someone from Argentina or like, Cambodia or something in the States, you would call them an immigrant. I fucking emigrated here. I'm an immigrant, like I'm technically still an American citizen, but I got permanent residence here. I'm probably going to live in here the rest of my life. I'm an immigrant. I emigrated over here. I started out with nothing. And, I'm not like wealthy or like, living like this full life of leisure or anything, but, I made shit work out. And it took a lot of hard work and loopholes here and there and stuff. Not to like try to like up myself or sound like extra dramatic or anything, but it's kind of the reversal of the whole American dream. Like, somebody emigrates to the States and with, nothing but the clothes on their back and like a suitcase and like a couple bucks in their pocket, and they slowly kind of work their way up and, succeed and shit. It was kind of the opposite version of that, I guess you could say. It took a few years to get things straightened out and to really get into a proper groove where I could be a proper functioning member of society and whatnot. But yeah, once I got here and realized that shit was even more fucking weird and cool and interesting than I thought it was, I was like, man, this place is awesome. I think I'm going to stay here. So I gotta find a job or get a visa or something. So the first 2 years or so, it was mainly like I'd come here for 3 months, go back for like a week, come back again for like 3 months, go back again for like 3 days. For about a year in between there, around I think 99, 2000, I moved to Vancouver actually, and then moved back to Japan again. Been here ever since. But if there was one specific thing looking way back that I could kind of pinpoint is the beginning of my one of these days, I'm going to move to Japan thing. My dad took me to see Black Rain. And I remember watching it and I was, oh, Michael Douglas movie, cool, Oh, hey, it takes place in Japan. Like, I know a lot of Japanese people, cool, And watching that movie and watching Yusaku Matsuda just being such a fucking badass and just being so fucking cool. I remember sitting there at like 8 years old thinking, one of these days, I'm going to go to Japan. And like, at the very least, I'm going to check this shit out. And again, being 8 years old and being fucking stupid, thinking I'm going to go to Japan and do some bad shit and be super cool like this guy, It's not like I had that in my mind, the next 10 years and thought, okay, one of these days I'm going to go to Japan because I saw Black Rain. But that was kind of the first time when I really thought, I think maybe going to Japan at some point might be a thing I might do, you know, totally unrelated to video games or anything, but a complete coincidence. And it blew my mind when I found out. But the place I was living right before the place I currently lived, I live in Osaka. I live on this weird, it actually kind of reminds me of some kind of like 24th, 25th ward shit. It's this weird man-made island that was kind of like made as like an experimental community / entertainment / like shipping area back in the late 70s, early 80s, I think. It's basically the island right next to where Universal Studios Japan is, and also right next to the island where they're going to be having the World's Fair and stuff coming up. I moved into this my previous apartment about 7 years ago, and about a month afterwards I was just looking stuff up on the internet because I'd never even heard of this place till I came and checked out the apartment itself. And you know, my wife and I, we dug it and we're like, okay, it's bigger than the place we have now, it's nicer, it's more comfortable, yeah, let's move here. So yeah, a few weeks later, I was just looking shit up about this place, and I found like some local website that looked like it was made on like Angel Fire or something back in like the 90s, you know, some really basic ass website. I was like scrolling through it on my phone, and I'm like, wait a second, what the fuck? And I scroll back, and there's a picture of Michael Douglas. I'm like, Michael Douglas, what the shit? The Japan parts were, I think, mostly, if not all, set here in Osaka, right? Turns out that the other main Japanese character, an actor named Ken Takakura, he was the guy who was like Michael Douglas's Japanese counterpart. The apartment that he lived in the movie happened to be like, oh, so I'm looking at this picture of Michael Douglas. I'm like, this looks really fucking familiar. So I'm thinking, oh shit, like right behind him, that's what I see when I walk out my door, you know? And I looked into it. I talked to some locals who had been like born and raised here, and found out that the not the building, but the actual apartment that I moved into was the apartment that Ken Takakura was living in the movie, or his character was living in the movie in Black Rain. So that's like wild. Like close to 30 years after I actually see the movie and get fully influenced by it, I'm living in this fucking apartment, you know, like that. Oh man, I was high off that for like 6 months. I was telling like everybody that I saw and met, you know where I live right now, man, you know where I fucking live right now. But yeah, again, it was complete coincidence. I had no idea that it was filmed there. I had no idea that that was the building or anything. I didn't even know the place existed at the time, because again, it's this man-made island that just kind of, you know, appeared in like the early 80s, whatever. Yeah, I happened to live in the apartment that is featured in Black Rain. So
that's funny, because I feel like that's the ultimate confirmation that you're exactly where you need to be in your life. But speaking more on Black Rain, is Suda a fan of the movie too? It even got mentioned in No More Heroes 3.
What the hell is this place?
Looks like something out of Black Rain.
So is this Osaka?
Yeah, it's gotta be.
Not as big as a fan as I am, but we have talked about it before. Yeah, it's one of the most standout examples of like you know, Japanese and Hollywood collaboration movies, especially not only taking place in Japan, but I mean the main bad guy Yusaku Matsuda and the main good guy, the Ken Takakura dude, they were two of like the biggest actors in Japan at the time. Like I mean, these guys were huge. And so these guys being like in a Hollywood movie, it was really big over here. It was a pretty big thing. So yeah, nice. He's not as much of like a Black Rain otaku, I guess you could say, as I am, but he digs it as well. Yeah.
It's funny that you aren't big on sushi, because neither am I. I went to Japan in 2017 with a bunch of friends and honestly had trouble with some of the food every once in a while. But your story also sounds like exactly what my mother did. She's from Colombia, but she moved to America when she was about 18 years old too. And just like you, she didn't like where she was growing up and things weren't getting better. She was in a particularly terrible area and felt America would mean a better life for her. And now she's a business owner here, has been for decades now. And you both obviously made the right choice, since you've got a career and a family too.
The food thing, that's the one thing. Again, I've been here the majority of my life. I've been living here, and when I really think about it though, most of the Japanese foods that I do like turn out to not really be Japanese at all. For example, like curry rice, which is like Indian by way of England, and like what we call chahan, which is basically just Chinese fried rice, and like ramen, which that's Chinese. Most of the Japanese food that I like is like just snacks and like chocolates and shit like that. But like
the best
sushi and like fish in general, I've never really been a big fan of. The few kinds of fish I do like catfish or like shark, whatever. People here are like, oh my god, you eat that shit? I'm like, you fucking don't. But I mean, you know, I'm a big old fat dude, man. I've been living in a country where I can't eat like most of the local cuisine for like most of my life. So if I would have immigrated to like Mexico or like Italy or someplace, I'd probably have a fucking channel. I'd probably have a show on the Learning Channel or something about me right now. You know, my 900-pound fucking life, whatever. Because I moved to a place where like all the food is amazing instead of a place where I'm like I gotta kick shit out of everything. And I go to a restaurant with like I'll go with like my wife and her family to like some restaurant, and they'll spend like $500-600 on this really big elaborate meal, and I'm like, I could literally eat like parts of like 2 of those things, and I'm like kind of secretly like slipping my wife and kids food like on the table, like, here, eat this so I don't look like an asshole, You're going to like weddings and funerals and stuff. Like, each plate was like $300. I'm like, I can literally not eat any of this. So hey, Yuka, is my wife. Hey, Yuka, come here, take this. Eat it quick. Put it in your pocket or something. Just take it, Yeah, the food is it's been a challenge here, man.
I hear ya. Anyway, I wanted to ask, are there any video games in particular you're a fan of? I feel like you've never talked about where your tastes lie.
I'm probably the dude in not only Grasshopper, but my previous jobs as well, who is probably the least into video games of anybody.
Really?
I have no problem with it. I mean, I love video games as much as the next dude, but I mean, like right now, I have a Switch that I bought mostly for my kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. I'm like, okay, well, instead of having them watching fucking YouTube videos of some dude playing like Mario Odyssey for 3 hours or something, I might as well buy them a Switch and let them like, learn hand-eye coordination and have something like entertaining from them to do that's not just completely passive, But I've got a Switch and a shitty computer that I can barely play Steam games on. I guess I am somewhat biased because a lot of the games that I would say are some of my favorites, I only know them and I'm only familiar with them because I worked on them in some capacity, localization, Like, I don't normally go out and like buy video games, and I don't play a whole lot apart from like with my kids or stuff that's work related. There's a lot of games like, for example, stuff like Call of Duty and like Fallout and like The Last of Us, like series like that I've never played and I couldn't even point out if you told me, you know what I mean? But yeah, again, this is a lot of my choices are pretty biased because I happen to be involved with them. But some of my favorite games, just like in history or like recently, or does it matter? No,
it doesn't matter. Whatever sticks out for you.
I'll break it down into like old school and like more modern times. Old school wise, this is way back in the day, but Rygar and City Connection from the NES. I still play City Connection every couple of weeks. I play that with my kid. Rygar, I still play that and rage quit like a bastard every hour or so, like every few months, Also, it's kind of I guess not the IP itself, but the game is kind of obscure. But there was a game for the Amiga and the Commodore 64 128 back in the 80s, based on the novel Neuromancer by William Gibson. I don't know what it is about that game, but I got it when it first came out. When I was like 9 or 10 or so. And I've just always loved the Neuromancer game. Like, I didn't actually read the novel until years after I played it, but that's a game that I go back to like once a year or so, just play through the whole thing. And I really don't know what it is. I can't even really recommend it to people because a lot of it's really clunky and kind of badly made, but for some reason I just really enjoy that shit. As for more modern stuff, I love the No More Heroes series. I felt super lucky to be able to work on like Travis Strikes Again and No More Heroes 3 and stuff, because I actually been playing the games before I had anything to do with Suda. So I especially love No More Heroes 3. As far as non-Grasshopper stuff goes, again, this is something that I'm only really familiar with because I did the localization, but Night in the Woods. I don't know if you've played that.
I haven't played it, but a bunch of my friends love the story in it.
It's a great game. That was actually, it's kind of rare in that I did the localization for that, but I actually did it from English into Japanese. The localizer works into their native language. But there was just so much about the game that was so specific to like American culture and like, contemporary American culture and stuff. When I was working for Playism, when we got the game for publishing and localization, I was like, you guys got to let me do this. Like, don't like have some a native Japanese speaker do it and let me like edit it. You got to let me do this shit. And then we can have a native speaker do the native check and like, make sure the grammar is proper and stuff like that. But the game, like the characters have a really specific like way of speaking and really specific characteristics and personalities. And I really felt that it needed an American and somebody who was like, who had experienced being like, 18, 19 years old, or like in America and growing up, going to high school and shit in America and dealing with like American parents and family dynamics and like, friends like going off to college and shit like that, which a lot of that experience is a lot different from the Japanese experience. again, having come out here when I was 18, I had a lot of experience with that, with the Japanese side of that as well. So I'm like, you guys got to let me do this. So I actually did the Japanese localization for that, and played through it before I started it. And I was like, wow, this is just a great fucking game. Night in the Woods is definitely one of my favorite games of the modern times. Yeah.
Nice. I gotta check it out.
It's it's really good. It's just a really great fucking game.
Nice.
Okay, I think that's about it. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that I took so much of your time.
Sorry for like rambling and shit. You may have noticed I have a tendency to just go the fuck off until somebody tells me to shut the hell up. So.